Act 1. At my father's anniversary dinner, my stepmother lifted her glass and said, "Liv was the practice daughter we had to survive before God gave us a clean start." And while half the table froze, I set my brass house key beside her plate, the small move that would leave her begging outside that same door before Christmas. That was the first time Elise ever looked afraid of me. Not angry, not offended, afraid. She knew what that key meant, even if most of the guests did not. My father knew too, because his hand shot out like he could grab the sound back out of the room. "Liv," he said, low and warning, as if I was the one who had just stripped somebody down in front of 24 people. I stood up without raising my voice. I did not throw the wine. I did not call her what she was. I only said, "You should finish your toast without borrowing my roof." Then I walked out through the side door my mother used to use. And the last thing I heard was Elise trying to laugh like she had meant something sweet. 6 weeks earlier, I was standing in the same kitchen at 6 in the morning, peeling labels off mason jars for a party Elise said would finally make this family official. Her words, not mine. My father, Paul, had married Elise when I was 17, 5 years after my mom died. Elise came with 2 sons, a polished voice, and a way of turning every favor into proof that you were lucky to be included. Years later, she and my dad adopted a little girl named Maisie, and everyone in town treated it like a miracle. I treated it like a child needed breakfast, clean socks, and somebody stable enough to show up when the miracle got tired. The house was mine, but nobody said it out loud unless there was a bill. My mother had left it to me because she knew my father loved big promises more than steady plans. I let Dad stay after I moved into my apartment above the pharmacy, first because he was grieving, then because Elise's boys needed school stability, then because Maisie arrived with a blue stuffed rabbit and a fear of bathtubs. Every year, there was a new reason I should not make the family feel unsafe by asking for rent or boundaries. Every year, Elise found a softer word for taking. By that fall, she hosted church groups in my mother's dining room, posted pictures under captions about the home we built, and called me generous only when other people were listening. That morning, Elise slid a stack of place cards across the counter and said, "I need you to redo these before work." She had written names in gold ink. Dad and Elise were at the head table. Her sons had their names beside their wives. Maisie had a little drawn crown over hers. My card said Olivia Bennett. Special helper. Not daughter. Not family. Special helper. I looked at it for 3 seconds too long, and Elise noticed. She always noticed where pain entered. "It's not a demotion," she said. "It's clarity. Maisie gets overwhelmed when too many women act like mothers around her." I put the peeler down. "I'm not acting like her mother. I'm the person you call when she has a fever, and Dad is at work." "And we appreciate that," Elise said quickly, because appreciation was the ribbon she tied around a trap. "But the adoption celebration is about attachment. If guests see you moving around like you run this house, it sends the wrong message." "My mother's name is still on the mailbox slot," I said. Elise's mouth tightened. That was her weak place, and I had touched it too early. She could compete with a living woman. She could charm one, shame one, outlast one. My mother was harder because she had left behind wood floors, recipes in a drawer, a mortgage paid down by lunch shifts, and me. Elise could not erase my mom without looking cruel, so she erased me instead and called it healing. Dad came in while I was holding that place card. He saw the words. He saw my face. Then he picked up his travel mug and chose the easiest side, like he had done for 14 years. "Liv, don't make this heavy," he said. "Elise has read the attachment books. She knows what Maisie needs." "What do I need?" I asked. He flinched, but only for a second. "You're grown." There it was. The family rule in 2 words. I was old enough to sacrifice, but too old to need protection. I could pay the plumber, take Maisie to speech therapy, leave work when Dad forgot pickup, and sit in the back pew so Elise's sons could fill the front. But if I asked to be named correctly, I was childish. If I objected, I was jealous of a 9-year-old. If I stepped back, I was punishing a family that had already been through so much. Maisie padded in wearing 1 sock and carrying the blue rabbit by its ear. She looked at the jars, then at me. "Liv, are you coming to my party?" Before I could answer, Elise said, "Of course she is. She's helping." Maisie accepted that because children accept the shape adults give a room. She held out a hair tie, and I bent so she could show me the knot she had made in it. That was the first tiny warning I ignored. Maisie had started asking if I was coming before every family event. A child only asks that often when somebody has made your presence feel optional. After Maisie left for school, I changed the place card. I did not write daughter. I did not write helper. I wrote my name only, Olivia Bennett, and set it back in the stack. Elise watched me do it. She smiled like she had just learned something useful. You know, she said, people admire quiet generosity. They don't admire scorekeeping. I almost laughed. Quiet generosity had bought their water heater. Quiet generosity had covered Elise's son Caleb when he wrecked Dad's truck and the insurance jumped. Quiet generosity had let my father play patriarch inside a house he did not own. But I had learned that listing facts to Elise only gave her more material to twist. So I picked up my purse and said, I have to open the pharmacy. Dad followed me to the side door. Act 2. By the time I reached my truck, Paul was already behind me, saying, Don't make your stepmother look homeless in front of her own guests, as if the worst thing happening that night was Elise losing face in a house she had never owned. I stopped with my hand on the door handle, and for 1 second I almost laughed, because that sentence told me exactly where I stood. Not daughter. Not owner. Not the person who had kept the taxes current, fixed the furnace, and let him stay after Mom died, because grief had made him look smaller than I had ever seen him. I was the problem because I had placed one brass key beside a plate. Paul kept his voice low, but not gentle. Liv, you embarrassed her. Behind him, through the kitchen window, I could see people moving around the table, pretending not to watch. Elise had not followed me. She was too smart for that. She stayed inside where she could be surrounded by witnesses and covered dishes, and the version of herself she sold best. I said, she put special helper on my place card. Paul rubbed the back of his neck, the way he did when he wanted a woman to make his discomfort disappear. It was a party. Don't turn it into a legal matter. That was the first time he said the quiet part near the open air. He did not say family. He did not say mistake. He said legal. I looked at him and realized he knew exactly what the key meant. He knew the house was still mine. He knew Elise knew it too. For years, they had both survived on my silence and called it peace. I'm coming tomorrow, I said. I'm picking up Mom's cedar chest and the file boxes from the back bedroom. Paul's face changed fast. Not anger first, panic first. Then anger, because panic made him feel exposed. Tomorrow is not a good time. Then tonight. He stepped closer to my truck door. You don't get to storm in and upset Maisie. There it was, the lever he knew would still catch under my ribs. Not Elise's sons, not the guests. Maisie. I had tucked that child into bed more nights than Elise ever admitted. I knew which nightlight hummed too loud and which story Maisie asked for when she felt left behind. Paul knew that. Elise knew it better. So I did not answer fast. I let the pause do its work. Then I said, if Maisie is upset, it won't be because I came into my own house. It will be because adults taught her that love means erasing someone and hoping they stay useful. Paul flinched like I had raised my hand. I had not. That was the thing about saying the plain truth in my family. It sounded violent only because everyone had worked so hard to keep it quiet. I drove back to the pharmacy with the place card still in my coat pocket. I lived in the apartment above the store, because I had given Paul room to breathe in the house after Mom's funeral. Then Elise moved in with her sons. Then Maisie came. Then my visits became help. Then my bedroom became extra storage. Every step had been small enough to excuse. That night, the whole staircase finally appeared. I did not sleep much. At 6 in the morning, I unlocked the pharmacy's back door for Mrs. Klein, who ran the front counter on Saturdays and had known my mother longer than I had. She looked at my face and said, "Did they finally say it out loud?" I pulled the place card from my pocket and laid it beside the register. Mrs. Klein read it once. Her mouth tightened. She did not ask me what I was going to do. That was why I loved her. She had raised 3 sons and buried 1 husband, and she knew that advice was sometimes just another hand on a woman's shoulder, steering her back into endurance. She slid the card back to me and said, "Your mother kept the spare house key under the blue planter until the day she died. She said a locked door only tells the truth if the right person has the key." It was not a speech. It was a reminder. My mother had made that house a place where neighbors came in when storms knocked out power. I had let Elise turn it into a stage where I was invited only to carry trays. I closed the pharmacy at noon and drove to the house, while the anniversary decorations were still drooping from the porch. The mason jars from the party sat in boxes by the steps, their ribbons damp from morning fog. That detail hit me harder than it should have. Elise had used my mother's porch to celebrate a marriage that had slowly pushed me out of my own rooms. I put the brass key in the lock. It turned smoothly. For all her confidence, Elise had not changed the locks. Not yet. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and floor cleaner. Elise was at the kitchen island with her phone in one hand and a grocery list in the other. She wore her calm face, the one she used when she wanted the room to believe she was the only adult in it. Paul stood near the sink, silent and already tired. Maisie sat at the table with her blue stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. When she saw me, she started to climb down from her chair, but Elise said, "Maisie, finish your cereal." The child froze halfway off the seat. That one command told me Elise had changed tactics. Last night, she had tried to make me small in public. This morning, she would make me cruel if I moved. I kept my voice steady. "I'm here for Mom's cedar chest and the file boxes from the back bedroom." Elise smiled without warmth. "We cleaned that room." My hand tightened around my keys. "Where is the chest?" Paul stared into the sink. Elise set her phone down like she was setting down a weapon she did not need yet. "Olivia, you left that room untouched for years. That isn't healthy. We made space for the boys when they come home. Some things were donated, some were moved." The word donated cut through me. My mother's cedar chest had held quilts, recipe cards, Christmas ornaments, and the hand-crocheted blanket she wrapped around me the week before she died. Elise said donated as if she had cleared expired cans from a pantry. Maisie whispered, "I wanted to keep the music box." Elise snapped her head toward her. "Maisie." The room went still. That was the first crack of the morning. And it did not come from me. It came from a 6-year-old who did not know which secrets were supposed to stay wrapped. I turned to Maisie, not Elise. "What music box, sweetheart?" Maisie pressed her rabbit under her chin. "The little white one. It played slow. Mom said it was trash because the lady inside was broken." "Mom?" Elise had trained that word into the house like a flag. I did not correct Maisie. None of this was her fault. I just looked at Paul. "You let her throw away my mother's things?" Paul finally faced me. "We couldn't keep a shrine forever." That sentence did more damage than Elise's place card. Elise was not blood. Elise had strategy. Paul had memory. He knew what was in that chest. He knew Mom's hands had folded those quilts. He knew I had kept that room closed, because losing her had taken a shape I could not move without bleeding. And still, he chose the clean line Elise had given him. Shrine. Not grief. Not history. Not my property. Shrine. I walked past them before I said something that would give Elise the scene she wanted. The back bedroom door was open. The room did not look empty. That would have hurt less. It looked replaced. Plastic bins lined one wall. A folding table held rolls of wrapping paper and gift bags. The small dent in the floor where my old bed frame had sat was still there, but everything that made the room mine had been taken. On the closet knob hung a paper tag in Elise's neat handwriting. Holiday storage, 2 words, and somehow they were worse than a lock. I heard Elise behind me. "Before you accuse anyone, ask yourself why you abandoned all of this." She had followed because she could not resist a private kill after a public wound. "You moved above that pharmacy. You said this house was too hard. We made it livable again." I turned then. "You made it yours." She tilted her head. "Someone had to." It was the kind of line she loved. Soft enough to sound reasonable from the hall, sharp enough to leave a mark up close. Paul stayed back. Maisie stayed at the kitchen table. Elise had placed everyone exactly where she wanted them. Then Mrs. Klein's old reminder came back to me. A locked door tells the truth if the right person has the key. I did not argue about the chest. I did not demand an apology. I walked to the closet and reached above the inside trim, to the narrow ledge my mother used for emergency cash and birthday cards. My fingers found dust, then a flat corner of something wrapped in wax paper. Elise went quiet behind me. I pulled it down. It was not money. It was my mother's spare key ring, tied with a faded red ribbon, with 3 keys I had not seen since I was 22. Paul stepped into the doorway. "Where did that come from?" I held the keys in my palm and saw Elise's eyes move to the smallest one. Not the front door. Not the garage. The tiny brass key with the square head. My mother's cedar chest key. Elise recovered fast, but not fast enough. She had known the chest was locked. She had known it mattered. And now I knew something else. Whatever Elise had done with that chest, she had not opened it. I closed my fist around the little key. Where is it? Elise's smile came back, thinner now. I told you, some things were moved. Moved where? Paul said. Liv, lower your voice. I looked at him once, and he did not say it again. Maisie appeared at the end of the hall with the blue rabbit dragging from her hand. Her face was pale with the kind of fear children get when they realize adults are not just mad, they are changing the rules of the world. She lifted one hand and pointed toward the basement door. The big box is downstairs, she whispered. She said nobody tell you because you'd start acting like it was your house again. Elise's calm cracked clean through. Maisie, go to your room. But Maisie did not move. She looked at me instead, and for the first time since I had walked back into that house, someone inside it waited for my choice, instead of Elise's command. I put the tiny key in my coat pocket, stepped past Elise, and opened the basement door. Behind me, Paul said my name like a warning. Below me, one stair creaked under my foot. And I knew before I reached the bottom that the cedar chest had not been donated at all. Act 3. The cedar chest was wedged behind the furnace with a strip of painter's tape across the lid that said trash, and for 1 second I hated Elise more for that word than for anything she had said at dinner. My mother had kept baby blankets, letters, and Christmas ornaments in that chest. Elise had dragged it into the basement, hidden it behind dust and utility pipes, and renamed it like it was junk waiting for the curb. Maisie stood on the step above me with both hands around the banister. She whispered, "I'm not supposed to be down here." And I knew right then that Elise had made the basement into a secret, not just a storage space. I pulled the tiny brass key from my palm and fit it into the lock. It turned so smoothly my throat closed. My mother had oiled that lock every winter because she said cedar cracked when people neglected it. The lid rose with a soft scrape, and the smell came out first, sharp and clean, like the back of my mother's closet. Then I saw the damage. The top tray was gone, the folded quilts were gone, the shoebox where she kept my kindergarten drawings was gone. What remained had been jammed in without care. 2 photo albums bent at the corners, a stack of envelopes tied with kitchen twine, my mother's blue cardigan with a rip down one sleeve. And under it all, a canvas tote I did not recognize. Maisie came down 3 steps before she stopped herself. She said those were old lady things, she said. She said old things make kids sad. That sentence told me exactly how Elise had sold it. Not theft. Healing. Not erasure. Protection. Elise could take a room apart and make it sound like therapy. I lifted the cardigan first, because it was the only thing I could touch without wanting to scream. Something small fell out of the pocket and bounced against the wood floor. It was my mother's thimble, the silver one with a dent from when I had stepped on it at 12, and cried harder than she did. I put the thimble in my pocket. Then I opened the canvas tote. Inside were place cards, printed labels, and a thick folder with Elise's handwriting across the front. Transition language. Not legal papers. Not anything official. Just her private script for how to make me smaller. The first page had short phrases underlined in purple pen. Olivia is still adjusting. Olivia prefers distance. Olivia may feel possessive about the house. Use helper language. Keep tone warm. I stared at those lines until they stopped looking like ink and started looking like a map of every dinner where I had left feeling cruel for wanting a chair. Maisie reached the basement floor and picked up one of the printed labels from the tote. It said Family Memory Closet. She turned it over like the other side might explain it. She put those on boxes, Maisie said. Not this one, the big plastic ones. I asked. What boxes? She looked toward the far wall, where a row of gray bins sat under the stairs. I crossed to them and pulled the nearest one out. The lid had another neat label. Seasonal decor. Inside were my mother's quilts, folded tight beneath fake pumpkins and a wreath Elise had bought last year. My mother's wedding quilt had a brown stain at the edge, as if someone had shoved a damp decoration on top of it and shut the lid. That was when I stopped being only hurt. Hurt made me freeze. This made me move. I took the quilts out one by one and stacked them on the cedar chest. I did not explain myself to Maisie, because Maisie did not need another adult making a speech over stolen things. She needed to see someone handle the truth like it deserved clean hands. When I opened the second bin, I found my old school boxes. the ones my mom had labeled by grade. Elise had covered my mother's handwriting with new labels that said guest bedding and craft supplies. Under the new label on one box, a torn corner exposed my mom's black marker. Live. Senior year. Footsteps crossed the kitchen above us. Maisie's face changed before I heard the basement door open. Elise said my name from the top of the stairs, and she did not sound surprised. She sounded ready. Olivia, step away from that chest. Not Liv. Not Honey. Olivia, like I was a problem she had rehearsed for. Paul came in behind her, and his voice followed hers, lower and weaker. What are you doing down there? I looked up at them with my mother's quilt in my hands, and the whole house seemed to hold its breath through the floorboards. I'm taking my mother's things out of the trash pile, I said. Elise came down 2 steps, then stopped where she could still look taller than me. That was her first adjustment. At dinner, she had used an audience. In the basement, she used height. You are scaring Maisie, she said. You came into this house angry. You pulled her into an adult conflict, and now you're tearing through storage like you're unstable. She didn't deny the chest. She didn't deny the labels. She changed the crime into my reaction to it. Paul looked at Maisie, not at the quilt. And I saw Elise's strategy land where she wanted it. Maisie moved behind me. That one step changed the room more than any argument could have. Elise noticed it, and her mouth tightened. Maisie, she said very gently, come upstairs. Maisie shook her head once. It was tiny, but it was the first no I had ever seen her give Elise. Paul reached for the railing like he needed help standing. Elise softened her voice even more. Sweetheart. Olivia is confused about what belongs where. Maisie pressed her shoulder against my arm and said, You told me to say the music box broke by accident. The basement went so quiet I heard the furnace click. Elise's eyes flicked to Paul, fast and angry, then back to Maisie. She did not fall apart. She adapted. That is not what I said, she answered. You misunderstood because you were upset. Then she looked at me. This is exactly why I didn't want you digging through dead things in front of a child. Dead things. She said it like my mother was clutter with a heartbeat problem. I almost gave her the explosion she wanted. I almost threw every label at her feet and asked Paul if he could still recognize shame. Instead, I folded the quilt over my forearm and kept my voice level. Maisie, go sit on the bottom step, I said. You don't have to answer anybody, Elise snapped. Do not parent my daughter. I looked up at her then. Then stop using her to hide what you did. Paul flinched, but he still did not come down. That hurt in a clean, final way. I had spent years waiting for my father to choose a side by walking toward me. In that basement, he chose by staying at the top. I opened the 3rd bin while they watched. Not because I needed more proof. Because I needed them to see me stop asking permission. This bin held the missing shoebox with my drawings, my mother's recipe cards, and a small cedar tray from inside the chest. The tray had been split at one corner. Under it was a stack of greeting cards tied with red yarn. They were not from my mother. They were addressed to Maisie, in different handwriting, with unopened envelopes tucked between them. I picked up the top one and read only the outside. To Maisie, for when you ask about us. No return address. No stamp. Just a name written in the corner. Aunt Renee. Maisie saw the name and made a sound I had never heard from her, not a cry. A sharp little breath, like someone had opened a door she thought was painted shut. Elise came down the stairs so fast Paul said her name. Put that back, she said. For the first time since I had known her, Elise sounded afraid, not embarrassed. Afraid. She reached for the cards, but I stepped back and held them against my chest with the quilt. Why are Maisie's letters in my mother's chest? I asked. Elise looked at Paul again, and this time he did not rescue her with a soft excuse. He looked at the cards. Then at Maisie, then at me. The weak part of him was still there, but something else had broken through it. Elise saw that too, and she changed tactics again. Her voice dropped into a warning meant only for adults. Those letters would have confused her. Her adoption counselor agreed that contact had to be managed. Paul said, I never saw those. Elise's face hardened. Because you let me handle the hard parts while you grieved in corners. That line was aimed at him, but it hit me too, because it was how Elise survived every room. She found the tenderest fact, and pressed until everyone backed away. Paul's grief. Maisie's fear. My love for a house that still smelled like my mother if you opened the right drawer. She built control out of things people were ashamed to defend. But the letters had changed the air. This was no longer only about my place in the family. Elise had hidden someone else's place too, and Maisie was old enough to understand that an unopened envelope meant somebody had tried. Maisie stepped off the bottom stair and held out her hand. "Are those mine?" she asked. Elise said, "Not now." I said yes. I gave Maisie the stack, but I kept my hand under hers because the yarn was loose and the cards could spill. That was the smallest act in the world, and it still felt like crossing a border. Elise stared at our hands as if I had stolen something from her in plain sight. Maybe I had. I had taken away her right to be the only doorway. Paul came down 2 steps. "Elise," he said, "why were they hidden?" She turned on him with a calm so sharp it sounded practiced. Because if Olivia had found them first, she would have done exactly this. Made herself the hero, made me the villain, made a child question the only stable mother she has. There it was, the new story forming while the old one burned. She was already trying to make the letters about my ego, not Maisie's right to know she had been remembered. I put my mother's cardigan, the thimble, the school box, and the rescued quilts inside the cedar chest. Then I shut the lid, not all the way, just enough to make the hinges answer. "I'm moving this upstairs," I said. "Tonight." Elise laughed once, without humor. "You are not dragging a corpse shrine through my living room," Paul whispered. Elise. That whisper mattered less than it should have, but it mattered. Elise heard it too. Her control slipped for half a second, and in that half second I saw her weakness clearly. She could manage sadness, guilt, and confusion. She could not manage a room where people started naming what belonged to them. I lifted one end of the cedar chest. It was heavier than I remembered, and my hands shook, but I did not let go. Maisie tucked the letters under her shirt like she was protecting a bird. Paul came down the rest of the stairs without speaking, and took the other end of the chest. Elise blocked the stairs above us, her body perfectly still, her face already arranging itself into the version of the night she would tell later. But for the first time, she had to tell it while standing in our way, and everyone in that basement could see it. Act 4. Elise grabbed the bottom corner of the cedar chest and hissed, "If that thing comes upstairs, Maisie loses the only stable mother she has." And for the first time, Paul's hands did not let go. The chest hung between us on the basement stairs, heavy enough to make my palms burn. Paul was below me, red-faced and breathing hard, and Elise stood at the landing like she could still turn the whole house back into hers by blocking a narrow strip of wood. Maisie was behind me with both arms around the brown paper bundle of letters, holding them like a rescued animal. Elise had stopped calling me dramatic. She had stopped pretending this was about clutter. Now she was saying the quiet part where Maisie could hear it. Paul said, "Move, Elise." It came out rough, not brave, but it was a sound I had waited years to hear from him. Elise stared at him like he had spoken in a language she had forbidden in her house. Then she stepped aside, just enough. Paul and I carried my mother's cedar chest into the kitchen, set it down near the table, and the whole room changed shape around it. The box was scratched, dusty, and marked with Elise's black trash lettering, but it sat there like it had returned from the dead and expected everyone to explain themselves. Maisie put the letters on top of the chest. Elise snapped, "Do not put those there." Maisie pulled her hands back, but she did not move away. That was the first crack. Not the chest. Not Paul's order. Maisie staying beside me when Elise used that voice. Elise saw it too, and her face shifted from anger into something smoother. That was her second tactic. When she could not block the stairs, she became the wounded adult. She pressed one hand to her chest and looked at Paul. She went through a child's private things. She dragged a dead woman's furniture through the house. She is making Maisie choose sides because she cannot accept that this family moved on. I almost answered too fast. I wanted to say the house had not moved on. I wanted to say my mother's recipe cards were in a bin labeled seasonal decor, and my childhood boxes were shoved behind paint cans, and her sweaters had been sorted like donation scraps. But I had learned something in that basement. Elise survived on making every fact sound like my emotion. So I stayed quiet and opened the chest. The cedar smell rose up, faint but still there. Inside were the quilts, the green cardigan, the school boxes, and the old sewing tin. The music box was missing. The stack of greeting cards was thinner than it should have been. My mother's thimble lay in the corner, dented but present, and when I picked it up, Paul made a sound like he had been hit. Elise caught it and turned on him. "Do not perform grief now. You agreed this room had to be functional." Paul did not look at her. He looked at the thimble in my hand. Your mom used that on every Halloween costume. I know, I said. That's why she kept it. Maisie whispered. The music box was blue inside. Elise's head snapped toward her. Maisie. Maisie flinched, but she kept going. It had a little bird that didn't spin right unless you tapped the lid. That detail cut through every adult sentence in the room. I had not told Maisie that. My mother used to tap that lid with one knuckle and say even broken birds deserved a full song. If Maisie knew that, then the music box had not just been misplaced. Elise had taken it out, shown it, used it, and then made the child lie about it. Paul finally turned toward Elise. Where is it? Elise gave him a tired smile. You cannot possibly be asking me about a broken trinket while she is frightening my daughter. There it was, my daughter. Not our family. Not Maisie. A claim. A shield. A warning. Maisie's fingers curled around the letters. I'm not frightened of Liv. Elise went still. I could feel Paul looking between them, late to a pattern that had been living in his own kitchen. I wanted to hate him for being late, and part of me did, but another part of me saw the fear in his face. Not fear of Elise screaming. Fear that if he understood one piece, he would have to understand all of it. The kitchen phone rang before anyone moved. It was the old wall phone my mother had refused to replace, the one with the curled cord that always twisted into knots. Nobody answered. It rang again. Elise reached for it too quickly. I said, "Let it ring." She froze with her hand inches from the receiver. This is still my home. No, I said. It's the house you've been living in. Paul closed his eyes. He knew the difference. Elise knew he knew. The phone rang a third time, and Maisie looked down at the top letter. The return address had been written in purple ink. Not official, not threatening, just a person trying again and again to reach a child. Maisie said, "It might be Renee." Elise's voice dropped. "Renee is not safe." Maisie looked at her. "Then why did you keep all her letters?" That question landed harder than any accusation I could have made. Elise had no clean answer, because every answer opened a door. If Renee was dangerous, why save the letters? If Renee was harmless, why hide them? If Maisie had no right to them, why did Elise know exactly where they were? The phone stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Paul reached for the top letter. Maisie pulled it away from him. Not mean, just firm. "It's mine." He nodded. "You're right." Elise laughed once, sharp and ugly. "Oh, now we are letting a child run the house because Olivia found a box?" "No," I said. "Maisie gets to open her own mail." Elise turned on me. "You do not get to parent her." "I'm not parenting her. I'm standing next to her." That was the line Elise hated most, because it did not give her anything to twist. She could attack interference. She could attack emotion. She could attack disrespect. She could not easily attack a person standing beside a child who had just asked a plain question. Maisie opened the first envelope with trembling fingers. I did not touch it. Paul did not touch it. Elise watched like the paper itself might betray her. Maisie unfolded one page, read silently for a few seconds, then frowned. "She says she came by in March," Elise said. "That is enough." Maisie kept reading. "She says she left cupcakes at the pharmacy because she didn't want to upset the house." My stomach turned. I remembered Mrs. Klein mentioning cupcakes from a woman with red hair, saying she hoped they were not overstepping. I had thought they were for Paul. My mother's pharmacy had been used as neutral ground, and Elise had still managed to make the message disappear. Paul said, "Elise." She was trying to confuse Maisie, Elise said. Her voice had changed again. Softer. Faster. Renee never accepted the placement. She wanted access when it suited her. I protected Maisie from inconsistency. I did what every therapist tells you to do. Children need one story. Maisie looked up. But it was my story. Elise's mouth opened, then closed. That was the midpoint, though I did not know to call it that then. Not because a hidden letter proved anything. Not because Paul suddenly became noble. It was because a child Elise had trained to repeat calm little phrases had just rejected the phrase that held the house together. Maisie read one more line, and her face changed. She says I asked for the blue music box because I liked the bird. No one breathed. I held out my hand, palm up, not asking for the letter, only offering Maisie a place to put the weight if she needed to. She did not hand it to me. She held it tighter. Good, I thought. Keep it. Let one thing in this house belong to the person it was meant for. Paul said, You gave Maisie the music box? Elise's control slipped for one bare second. I gave a lonely child something pretty. And then you threw it away? He asked. I removed it when Olivia started using objects to confuse boundaries. I almost laughed because the sentence was so polished it had no blood in it. Then I saw Paul's face, and the laugh died. He knew that language. He had repeated pieces of it to me at the party. He had let Elise turn my mother's belongings into a threat, and now the same words were wrapped around Maisie's past. The phone rang again. This time Paul answered it. Elise lunged, but he turned his back to her and pressed the receiver to his ear. Hello? His shoulders tightened. Then he looked at Maisie. Yes, she's here. Maisie stopped breathing. Elise said, Hang up. Paul covered the mouthpiece. It's Renee. Elise reached for the cord. I stepped between them. I did not shove her. I did not raise my voice. I just put my body where her hand wanted to go, the way she had put herself on the basement stairs. The difference was that I was not blocking the truth. I was blocking the person trying to bury it again. Paul held the receiver out toward Maisie. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, Elise said. If she speaks to that woman, I will not be responsible for what happens to her. Maisie looked at Elise, then at the letters, then at me. Her face was pale, but her voice was clear. What happens to me if I don't? No adult in that kitchen had an answer ready for that. Not Elise with her perfect phrases. Not Paul with his late courage. Not even me. Because Maisie had named the trap better than any of us could. Elise had made contact sound dangerous, but silence had already cost Maisie pieces of herself. Maisie took the phone. Hi, she said so softly I barely heard it. Then her eyes filled. I thought you stopped writing. A woman's voice came through the receiver, broken and urgent, not loud enough for words, but loud enough for feeling. Maisie pressed the phone tighter to her ear. Elise backed toward the counter as if the voice had entered the house without permission and changed the locks from the inside. Paul looked at me over the top of the cedar chest. For once, he was not asking me to make this easier. He was seeing what easier had done. Then Maisie lowered the phone and said to Elise, Renee says she has something of mine that you mailed back. Elise's face went blank. I knew that look. It was not guilt. It was calculation running out of room. Maisie held the receiver against her chest and turned to Paul. She says it has my old last name on it. Act 5. Maisie was still holding the phone when Renee said, The package your mother sent back has your father's name on it. And Elise came in fast enough to hear every word. The room changed before anyone moved. Paul was beside the cedar chest with my mother's quilts half folded over his arm. Maisie had the phone pressed to her ear like it might be taken from her. I still had my mother's thimble in my palm. And for the first time all night, Elise looked less angry than afraid. Elise did not lunge for the phone. That would have made her look guilty. And Elise almost never chose the move that made her look guilty first. She stopped in the doorway, softened her voice, and said, Maisie, sweetheart, give me the phone. This is not a safe conversation. Maisie's face tightened. Renee must have heard because she said calm and clear, Maisie, you do not have to answer anything. Just listen. I have the blue music box. The little bird still turns if you tap the lid twice. Maisie let out a sound so small it hurt worse than crying. Paul looked at Elise. You told me that was lost. Elise kept her eyes on Maisie. It was a trigger object, she said. Her counselor agreed old grief rituals were keeping her stuck. Paul said, What counselor? That was the first clean crack in Elise's language. She had always used invisible experts as walls. A counselor had said it. A book had said it. A parenting group had said it. This time Paul did not step back from the wall. He put the quilts down and asked again, What counselor, Elise? Elise's voice sharpened for 1 second, then went soft again. Do not interrogate me in front of children. I almost laughed because Maisie was 14, not 4, and Elise only called her a child when she needed her powerless. Maisie took the phone away from her ear and put it on speaker with shaking fingers. That one small choice moved the whole room. Renee's voice came through thin but steady. I sent that music box after Danny died because Maisie asked for something that played the song he used to hum. Elise mailed it back 3 weeks later. The box was unopened, except for one strip of tape across the bird. The return label said, No child named Maisie Callahan lives here. Maisie stared at the phone. She told me you wanted it back, Renee said. Never. That one word did not explain anything. It did not need to. Maisie turned toward Elise, and Elise changed tactics again. She dropped the gentle mother tone and aimed straight for fear. Renee wants to pull you backward. She never accepted that we built a stable life. She wanted access, not connection. Renee did not fight the insult. I wanted to send birthday cards, she said. I wanted her to know. Her father's people did not vanish. Maisie whispered. You wrote every year? Renee said. Every year. Paul moved then. Not toward Elise. Toward Maisie. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that Elise could no longer cross the room without passing him. Maisie, he said. Did you know your last name was Callahan? Maisie looked at him as if the answer might punish someone no matter what she said. I knew when I was little, she said. Then Mom said it hurt you if I used it. Paul's mouth opened, then closed. Elise stepped in fast. Because we were becoming one family. You agreed with that, Paul said. I agreed to love her. I did not agree to erase her father. That sentence did something to Elise. Her face did not fall apart, but the smoothness left it. She pointed at the cedar chest, at my mother's cardigan, at the letters, at the phone. This is what Olivia does, she said. She turns homes into courtrooms. She digs through dead women's sweaters and teaches children to distrust their mothers. There it was. Elise had found the cleanest lie left. She could not deny the letters. She could not deny the music box. So she tried to make the discovery itself disgusting. If she could make me look cruel for noticing the harm, maybe she could keep control of the room. I wanted to answer fast. I wanted to say every brutal thing sitting on my tongue. Instead, I put the thimble on top of the cedar chest where everyone could see it. I did not teach Maisie to distrust you, I said. You taught her that by making her miss people who were still reaching for her. Maisie looked at the thimble, then at the phone. The chest had started as my mother's story, but now it held both of ours. Elise had treated every inconvenient piece of love the same way. Relabel it. Hide it. Call it clutter. Call it unhealthy. Call it a fresh start. Renee spoke again, more carefully. Paul, I do not want to take Maisie from anybody tonight. I want permission to mail her own things to her without them being returned. Elise snapped. You do not get to negotiate access with my husband. That told us something new. Elise had not said our family. She had not said Maisie's stepfather. She said my husband, because Paul was the gate she still thought she owned. Paul heard it too. He looked at her and asked, Did you tell the school I adopted Maisie? Elise froze just long enough to answer before she chose words. I told them we were using one family name socially. Did I sign anything? Paul asked. Elise looked furious now. You are reducing a family to paperwork, Paul said. Did I sign anything? No, Elise said, because you kept saying Olivia needed time. She turned that last sentence toward me like a knife. You always kept one foot in the old life, and I had to protect the child in the new one. There was her deeper story, ugly and clear. I had not only been inconvenient, my mother had been inconvenient. Maisie's father had been inconvenient. Renee had been inconvenient. Anyone who proved there had been loved before Elise was a threat to the life she wanted to stage. Maisie lifted her chin. My name is Maisie Callahan. Elise said, Your name is what I say it is until you are 18. Paul's head snapped toward her. Renee went silent on the speaker. I felt the room hold its breath. Elise realized too late that she had said the private rule out loud. She tried to recover. I mean legally. I mean as your mother. Maisie backed one step closer to Paul. You said Dad's name made me harder to love here. Paul looked like someone had hit him in the chest. She said that to you? Maisie nodded once. Elise reached for Paul's arm, but he moved away. It was not dramatic. It was worse for her because it was simple. Renee? Paul said toward the phone. Do you still have the music box? Renee said yes. And the letters I sent after Elise mailed it back, Renee added. I kept copies of my own cards, because I was scared one day Maisie would think I stopped. Elise gave a short, bitter laugh. Of course you did. You were always waiting to make me look monstrous, Renee answered. No. I was waiting for a child to be allowed to remember her father. Maisie covered her mouth with her hand. I saw the old loyalty tearing at her, because Elise was still her mother. That was the part nobody outside a house like that understands. A lie can hurt you, and still be wrapped around the person who packed your lunch, signed your permission slips, and knew how you liked your toast. Maisie did not stop loving Elise in that room. She just stopped letting Elise be the only person who could name what love required. Paul picked up the phone from the table, but he did not take it away from Maisie. He held it between them. "Renee, can you bring the music box tomorrow?" Elise said. "If she comes to this house, I will call the police." Paul looked at the cedar chest, then at the letters in Maisie's hand, then at Elise. "Then she will not come to the house," he said. "I will meet her outside." Elise stared at him like he had spoken a language she had forbidden. Maisie reached for the phone again, and Paul let her take it. "Aunt Renee," Maisie said, her voice still shaking. "When you—" Act 6. Elise was already in the driveway when Paul opened the garage door, standing behind his car with her phone in her hand like she had been waiting to turn our leaving into a crime. Renee's calls had stopped, the kitchen had gone too quiet, and Maisie stood beside the cedar chest with the bundle of letters pressed against her stomach. Paul had said we would meet Renee away from the house, but Elise had moved faster than all of us. She looked at Maisie first, not Paul. "If you walk out there with them," she said, "you are choosing strangers over the mother who stayed." That sentence hit Maisie where Elise knew it would. I watched her shoulders pull in, and I hated how practiced Elise was at finding the softest place and pressing there. Paul stepped between Elise and the garage door. "No," he said. "She is not choosing against anyone. She is hearing from someone you kept away." Elise's face changed just enough to tell me she had already abandoned denial. Now she was building a cleaner story for whoever might hear it later. She lowered her voice and said, "A grieving woman found a box in my basement, and now you are letting her drag my daughter into it." She did not say my name. She made me sound like a condition. I wanted to answer, but Maisie moved before I did. She walked to the passenger side of Paul's car and opened the door herself. It was such a small action, but it cut through the driveway harder than shouting would have. Elise took one step after her. Paul said, "Stop." He did not yell. He used the voice he used when a stove flame caught a towel or a dog ran into the street. Elise froze because that voice was not asking her to cooperate. It was marking danger. Maisie got in the car with the letters in her lap. I climbed into the back seat, and Paul shut my door with his hands still shaking. We met Renee in the parking lot behind a closed bakery, because Paul wanted open space and no audience Elise could perform for. Renee stood beside a dented green truck, with both hands visible, as if she knew she had been painted as frightening and had decided not to give Elise even a shadow to use. She was shorter than I expected. Her hair was gray at the temples, and she held a blue music box wrapped in a towel against her chest. When Maisie saw it, she made a sound I had never heard from her before. It was not a sob. It was recognition breaking through fear. Renee did not rush her. That was the first thing that made the air change. She did not say, "Come here." She did not say, "I missed you," even though the words were all over her face. She put the music box on the hood of the truck and stepped back. "You can look at it from there," she said. "You do not owe me a hug to hear the truth." Maisie stared at the box, then at Renee. Paul stood close enough to Maisie that she could lean into him, but not so close that he trapped her. For the first time since the cedar chest came upstairs, no one was pulling Maisie in opposite directions. The box was smaller than I remembered from my mother's chest, but the color was unmistakable, that deep chipped blue with tiny white moons painted along the edge. Renee turned the key once. The tune came out thin and uneven. Maisie whispered the next 3 notes before the box played them. Renee covered her mouth, and the sight of that restraint did more than any speech could have done. She had been waiting years, and still she let Maisie lead. "Your dad used to wind it too tight," Renee said. "He said patience was for people with better fine motor skills." Maisie gave a broken laugh. It was the first laugh I had heard from her that did not ask permission first. Then Elise arrived. She pulled in so hard her tires scraped the curb, and the whole parking lot snapped back into threat. She got out with her phone already raised, not filming close enough to be obvious, but high enough to be useful. Her voice changed into that careful public softness I had come to hate. "Maisie, sweetheart, step away from the truck." Renee's hands lifted at her sides. Paul turned slowly. Elise looked past him toward the bakery windows, toward the street, toward any possible witness. "I have asked for this contact to stop," she said. "This woman is upsetting my child." Maisie flinched at "my child," and Renee saw it. That was Renee's payoff, though she did not use it cruelly. She did not argue ownership. She did not compete. She looked at Maisie and said, "You can tell me to leave, and I will leave. But nobody gets to make me pretend you disappeared." Elise's phone lowered half an inch. That line did not fit her script. It was not a custody grab. It was not a threat. It was a boundary Elise could not easily twist. Paul asked Elise one question. What name was on the package you sent back? Elise blinked. This is not the place. It is exactly the place, Paul said. You told a woman who loved Maisie that no child by that name lived here. Elise recovered fast, because that name was used by people who destabilized her. Renee shook her head once, not in anger, but in disbelief. Her father used that name, she said. Her birth certificate uses that name. Her birthday cakes use that name. I used it because it belongs to her. Elise turned to Maisie then, and that was when I saw her weakness clearly. She could control rooms. She could rename harm as safety. She could make Paul doubt his own eyes for 5 seconds longer than he should have. But she could not stand still when Maisie had a choice that did not pass through her. Do you hear this? Elise said to Maisie. They are making you into a symbol. It was a clever line. It made all of us sound selfish. It almost worked, because Maisie's face folded with guilt. Then the music box clicked and stopped in the middle of the tune. Maisie reached out and touched the lid with 2 fingers. I remember this on the bookshelf, she said. Not from before. From your room, Mom. Elise went white in a way no performance could cover. Paul looked at her. I did too. That was new. Maisie was not remembering a story Renee told her. She was placing the box inside Elise's private space after Elise had claimed she returned it and kept it away for safety. Elise had not only blocked Renee, she had kept the object, kept the power of it, and let Maisie hunger for a life Elise had hidden in plain sight. Elise changed tactics again. She stopped speaking to Maisie and aimed straight at Paul. If you humiliate me in front of your ex-wife's daughter and this woman, you will blow up the only stable home that child has. There it was. She put the house on the table. She put marriage on the table. She put Paul's fear of failure on the table. I could see it land. Paul's jaw tightened, and for one awful second, I thought he might retreat into caution. Then Maisie did something that made retreat impossible. She picked up the music box and held it against her chest, the same way she had held the letters. I want to keep this tonight, she said. Elise's mouth opened. Maisie added, not hidden, not in your room, in mine. Paul looked at Elise, and the last thin thread of pretend peace snapped. Yes, he said, it stays with Maisie. Elise laughed once, sharp and ugly. You don't get to decide that. Paul said, I do in my house tonight. That was the first time he said my house in front of her. Not our home. Not the family home. My house. Elise heard it too. Her face did not fall apart. She was too disciplined for that. But the phone in her hand dipped to her side, and for the first time, she had no immediate sentence ready. Renee took a step back from the truck. I brought one more thing, she said. She reached through the open window and took out a plain white envelope. This is not for you, she told Paul. It is not for Elise. It is for Maisie when she wants it. Elise lunged for language before she could lunge for the envelope. Absolutely not. Renee did not move toward Maisie. She handed the envelope to Paul instead, and that choice mattered. She was not stealing authority. She was forcing Paul to use his. Paul held the envelope without opening it. What is it? Maisie asked. Renee swallowed. A list of people who kept saving a chair for you, she said. Names, birthdays, phone numbers, nothing you have to answer tonight. Maisie looked at Paul. He nodded once and gave it to her. Elise made a small strangled sound, like the room she had built in her head had lost a wall. We drove home in 2 cars because Elise refused to ride with us. Paul asked Renee to follow at a distance, not to come inside. Not yet, he told her. Renee accepted it. That restraint made Paul look both relieved and ashamed. In the back seat, I watched Maisie hold the music box in her lap with one hand and the unopened envelope with the other. She did not ask anyone what she was allowed to feel. She just held both pieces of herself and breathed. At the house, Elise was waiting on the porch. She had gotten there first, and she had used the minutes well. 2 black trash bags sat beside the front door. My stomach dropped because I knew before Paul spoke. Elise had gone back to the basement. She had found what we had not carried up. Paul stepped out of the car slowly. What did you do? He asked. Elise looked at me, and now the mask slipped enough for the cruelty underneath to show clean. I gathered the rest of the dead weight, she said. If Olivia wants her mother back so badly, she can haul every scrap out tonight. Maisie got out of the car with the blue music box pressed to her ribs. Paul did not look at me first. He looked at his stepdaughter, then at the trash bags, then at his wife. "Open them," he said. Elise's laugh came back, but weaker. "Do not start ordering me around on my own porch." Paul walked past her, tore the first bag open, and my mother's yellow recipe tin rolled out onto the concrete, dented but still shut. The second bag had photo envelopes, a church cookbook, and the quilt square my mother had never finished. Elise had not thrown away clutter. She had gathered a life and called it garbage. I bent to pick up the recipe tin, but Maisie reached it first. She set the music box carefully on the porch rail and lifted the tin with both hands. "This doesn't go in a bag," she said. Her voice was quiet, but nobody missed it. Then she turned to Elise. "And neither do I." Paul looked at his wife with a steadiness I had never seen from him. "Go inside," he said. "We are not done, but you are done touching anything that belongs to Olivia, Maisie, or the dead." Elise stood in the doorway, trapped between the porch and the house she had controlled for years. Behind her, the phone started ringing on the kitchen counter, the same sharp ring Renee had used all afternoon, and this time nobody moved to silence it. Act 7. Elise had my mother's quilt halfway inside a contractor bag when Paul walked in and said, "If that bag leaves this house, you leave with it." For 1 second, nobody moved. Maisie stood beside me with the blue music box pressed to her stomach, and I had both hands around the cedar chest lid, like I could hold my mother in place by force. Elise did not look guilty. That was the first thing that scared me. She looked annoyed, like Paul had interrupted a task she had every right to finish. She let the black bag drop against her leg. "So now I'm the villain for cleaning?" she said. "Olivia has kept this room like a shrine for years, and you let it poison the whole house." Paul stepped over the loose pile of quilts, envelopes, and old kitchen things Elise had pulled out while we were gone. He picked up my mother's cardigan from the floor and held it against his chest for half a second before folding it over his arm. That small action changed the room more than yelling would have. Elise had built her control on making every old thing look excessive. Paul made one old thing look normal again. "Elise," he said, "you told me Olivia packed this herself." Elise's mouth tightened. She switched tactics fast. She turned from Paul to Maisie, because Maisie was the softer target. "Do you see what they're doing?" she said. "They are turning this into a museum for dead people. I tried to give you a clean life." Maisie did not answer. She walked to the trash bag, pulled out the unfinished quilt square, and set it on top of the cedar chest. Then she placed the music box beside it. Two erased histories sat there together, and Elise saw it before any of us said it. Paul pointed toward the kitchen. "We're talking there, not in front of the chest." Elise gave a short laugh. "You don't get to command me in my own home." Paul did not raise his voice. "You moved into my house. You married me. You did not get permission to bury my first wife, rename Maisie, and teach both girls that love means disappearing quietly." That was the first time Paul said it all in one breath. Not as a question. Not as a hurt husband asking for an explanation. As the man who had finally heard himself. Elise walked to the counter and grabbed her phone. I thought she would call someone to make herself look trapped or betrayed. Instead, she called her sister, put her on speaker, and said, "I need you to hear this. Paul is losing it, and Olivia has dragged Maisie into it." That was Elise's next move. Turn a private reckoning into a witness for herself. But her sister did not react the way Elise expected. There was a pause, and then a tired voice said, "Elise, I told you not to touch those boxes." Elise went still. Paul looked at the phone. Maisie looked at Elise. I felt the whole house tilt. Elise snatched the phone off speaker, but it was too late. Her sister kept talking, muffled now against Elise's palm. Elise ended the call and said, "She doesn't know what she's talking about." Paul said, "She knew there were boxes." Elise's face changed then. Not broken. Cornered. She set the phone down slowly and tried the only move she had left. "Fine," she said. "Yes, I put things away. Yes, I returned things that would have confused a child. Yes, I made choices because everyone else was too weak to make them. I kept this family from becoming a graveyard." Maisie flinched at that word, but she did not step back. She opened the music box. The little bird did not rise smoothly. It jerked once under the old tape mark, then clicked into place. The tune came out thin and uneven, but it played. Elise stared at it like the sound had accused her. Maisie said, "My dad is not a graveyard." Her voice shook, but she kept going. Olivia's mom is not a graveyard. You use that word because dead people can't correct you. Paul turned to me. Olivia, get the chest. I thought he meant move it somewhere safe. Then he took the trash bag from Elise, emptied it onto the floor, and handed me the empty bag. This is for anything Elise brought into this room to hide what she did. Elise barked. You are not throwing away my things, Paul said. No, I'm taking your things out of this room. That difference mattered. He was not copying her. He was drawing a line. We worked without making it a ceremony. I put my mother's things back in the cedar chest. The cardigan, the cookbook, the recipe tin, the thimble, the envelopes, the quilt square. Maisie kept the music box in her own hands. Paul took down the framed blended family photo Elise had hung over the chest months earlier, the one where my mother's old corner had been hidden behind all of us smiling on command. He did not smash it. He set it face down on the hallway table. Elise watched him do it, and that was the first concrete consequence she could not explain away. Her version of the family no longer got the best wall in the house. Then the doorbell rang. Elise jumped like she had been caught stealing. Paul went to the door. Renee stood outside with a paper grocery bag and a face that looked prepared for rejection. She did not step in until Paul said, "Come in." Elise said, "Absolutely not." Paul said, "Maisie decides." That sentence moved more power than any argument before it. Maisie walked to the entry with the music box still open in her hands. Renee saw it and covered her mouth, but she did not rush forward. She waited. That waiting was its own kind of respect. Maisie said, "Did you really save a chair?" Renee nodded. "At every Christmas Eve dinner, my boys complained about the empty chair, until they were old enough to understand why it stayed." Maisie looked down at the music box. "I'm not ready for Christmas Eve," Renee said. "Then we start with pancakes somewhere public, and you leave whenever you want." Elise made a harsh sound. "You are all insane if you think I'm letting a stranger take my daughter anywhere." Maisie turned back to her mother. "You don't get to call everyone a stranger after making them strangers." That line did not fix Maisie's pain. It did something better. It placed the pain where it belonged. Elise opened her mouth, but Paul spoke first. "I booked a hotel for tonight under your name. I'll pay for 3 nights. After that, you can stay with your sister or make another plan." Elise stared at him. "You are throwing me out?" Paul said. "I'm removing you from the people you keep trying to erase." He took his keys from the hook and slid one off the ring. "This one stays here." Elise's control did not collapse in one dramatic scream. It drained out in pieces. First she said Paul would regret humiliating her. Then she said Maisie would hate him for breaking the family. Then she looked at me and said, "You finally got what you wanted." That one almost landed. It was shaped like the old trap. If I defended myself, she would make me sound greedy. If I stayed quiet, she would make my silence sound like guilt. So I chose neither. I said, I wanted my mother's things out of the trash. Nothing more. Nothing she could twist into a bigger fight. Elise packed fast because she wanted the last action to look voluntary. She took her purse, 2 suitcases, and the framed photo from the hallway table. Paul stopped her before she reached the door. "Leave the picture." Elise clutched it harder. "It's mine," Paul said. "No, it's evidence of what you tried to replace. It stays until the girls decide what to do with it." Maisie surprised us all by taking it from Elise's hands. She looked at the 4 forced smiles behind the glass, then turned it around and slid out the backing. Behind the printed photo was an older picture I had not seen in years. My father, my mother, and me on the back steps, hidden there because the frame had once been ours. Elise had not even known it was there. That was why the moment cut so clean. Not every buried thing had been buried by her. Some things had simply waited under what she pasted on top. Paul took the old photo gently. He looked younger in it. I looked like a child who still believed the house would keep its promises. He handed it to me and said, "You decide where this goes." I did not hang it right away. I laid it on the cedar chest, beside the quilt square and the music box, because for once nothing had to be hidden to make room for something else. When Elise left, nobody chased her. Nobody made a speech on the porch. Paul locked the door and stood there with his hand on the deadbolt until the sound of her car faded. Renee stayed near the entry, still careful not to claim more than she had been given. Maisie handed her the unopened envelope. "Can we read it here?" she asked. Renee nodded, and Maisie opened it herself. Inside was not a demand, not a plan, not a claim. It was a list of names, phone numbers, birthdays, and one line at the top in plain handwriting. People who will be glad to know you at your speed. Maisie read the first 3 names out loud. Then she stopped and pressed the paper to her chest. Paul asked if she wanted Renee to stay for dinner. Maisie shook her head. Pancakes first, she said. Renee smiled through tears and said, pancakes first. That was her payoff, small and complete. She did not get the child back in one night. She got permission to stop knocking at a locked door. The visible consequence came the next morning. Paul carried Elise's remaining boxes from the primary bedroom to the garage, and he changed the house alarm code in front of us. He did not ask me to forgive him for being late. He did not ask Maisie to make him feel like a good man. He just said, no one removes your history from this house again. Then he handed Maisie a key with a blue rubber cap and handed me the brass key to the cedar chest. Mine was warm from his palm when I took it. By Sunday, the house did not feel peaceful. Peace was too clean a word for what came after. It felt honest, which was harder and safer. Maisie put the music box on her dresser, not in a drawer. I put my mother's cardigan in the cedar chest, but I left the unfinished quilt square on top. Paul made coffee and burned the toast, because nobody was pretending to be fine. When Renee texted a pancake place and a time, Maisie showed Paul the message first, then showed me, then answered it herself. That afternoon, I hung the old photo by the back steps, not over the cedar chest. I wanted the chest to belong to more than grief. Maisie came down with the music box key in her hand and asked if the bird always stuck before the song started. I told her yes, it had done that since we found it. She wound it once, and the little bird fought past the catch, lifted crookedly, and kept singing. The final sound I remember from that day is not Elise's car leaving or Paul locking the door. It is that stubborn tinny note from Maisie's room, one beat late, still finding the tune.